We're up to Daf Yud Amid Aleph, Amr of Nachman, Amr Rav. It's a few lines into the page. So this Daf is very short and pretty simple, to be honest with you. Amr of Nachman, Amr Rav. Ra echot sheshachat. If you see someone shecht, imro mitchila vatsaif. If you watch the whole time and you're mashkiach the whole time, mutalech mashchitase. Then you could eat the meat. V'imlav aslech mashchitase. But if you're not watching the whole time, you can't. Now the question is, what exactly is the situation? There's a situation where if I'm watching the whole time, then I could eat the meat from the shechita, if not. Does this guy know anything? Is he a knowledgeable person? If he's a knowledgeable person, why am I watching? If he's not a knowledgeable person, then the Gemara is going to try to figure out exactly what exactly is the case. The Gemara says, Hechi dami. Idi yada v'gamer. If you know that this shaychid is knowledgeable, like he's a Talmud Chacham, whatever it is, he's an established shaychid, lamali ra, why do I have to be watching? And and if you know that he's ignorant, pshita, then of course, what's the chiddush? That you have to watch the guy? Of course you have to watch the guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. So what exactly is the case? Says the Gemara, okay, well it can't be, again, the options are, if you know he's a Talmud Chacham, you don't have to watch. If you know he's ignorant, then it's pashut. So the answer is, it's the third case. I don't know. So says the Gemara, the answer is, it must be referring to a situation where I don't know what he is. Therefore, I have to watch misafik. Here's the problem. The problem is, we talked about the last two dafim, chazaka and roiv. There is a concept called roiv mutsuyin etzel shchita mumchen, which is that the average shaychit is knowledgeable. And that's a halacha that could be followed. So the question is, if it's a situation where I don't know, so why do I have to watch? Why can't I just rely on this roiv, which is most people that shech know what they're doing, and I shouldn't have to watch. So says the Gemara, Lema roiv mitzuyim etel shchita mumchen. Why don't you say that there's a roiv, that roiv people that shech know what they're doing, so I shouldn't have to watch. I should just be able to eat it, even without it being a mashkiach. Miloi Tanya, where is this precedent set? Because the Brisa says, if you find a shechted chicken, no hechsher, you don't know whether it was shechted properly or not. Again, not practical halacha, but back then, you don't know whether it's shechted properly or not. Or I send a shliach to go shecht me a chicken. And I come back, and on the table is a shechted chicken. Now that could be that he shechted it. It could be he found it, shechted it. No one was watching. I don't know what happened. So the halacha is, in both these cases, chezkasei shachet. You could assume that it was properly done. Alma, why? Amrin and roiv mitzuya eitzel shchita mumchem, because the average person who shechs knows what they're doing, and that's the roiv. Roiv, people that shech know what they're doing. So the question is, back to our case, hachanami lema roiv mitzuya eitzel shchita mumchem. So back to our case before, I have to watch the whole time. Why? Again, if he knows what he's doing, it's pashut. If he knows what he's doing, then why do I have to be watching him? If he's an ignorant person, I know he doesn't know the halacha, then it's pashut. The answer is, I'm not sure. I don't know I've never met the guy, so you have to watch. Why? The average shaychid is knowledgeable. So if I just show up to a random guy and he's shechting, I shouldn't have to watch. I could just rely on the fact that he knows what he's doing. So the Gemara says, the case is as follows. I know he's ignorant, meaning, you're right, the average shaychid, if you don't know anything about them, you could assume that they're knowledgeable. We're talking about a case where I know the guy's an idiot. I know he does not know the halacha b'chalal. So we said before, well, if I know that he doesn't know the halacha, isn't it pashut? The answer is, the case is as follows. The shachat kamon chad siman shaper. While I was watching, he cut one of the simanim, right? He cut, let's say, the esophagus, not the trachea. And then I left. So you might think that because he cut one in front of me well, we could assume he probably finished the job well. Kamashwala, no. If you're not watching the whole time and you know he's ignorant, no good. So the cases where you know he's ignorant, and we said, well, isn't it pashut you have to be watching? If you know he's ignorant, then he doesn't know anything. The answer is, I saw half of it. So you might think that because I saw half of it, mistama, he finished the job properly. No, Kamashwala, maybe in the second half he messed up. So says the Gemara, Mao the same midaha shapir. You might think that because he cut one of the simanim properly, Hachnami shapir, he cut the second one properly as well. Kamashvalan, the Gemara says no, that if you're not watching the whole time, it's no good. Why? Hi Yisram Yisramile. Maybe he got lucky with the first one, and either Shemeshavet Shemadaris, but the second one he might have messed up. By the second simon, he might have messed up. Now we said before that if a person sends a shliach to shech the chicken, and then he comes back and there's a chicken on the table, you could assume that it's done well because Rav Mitzuyin Eitzel Shchita Mumchen. The Gemara now is going to analyze that halacha. Now that brisa that we said was apparently not known to all the Amoraim. So the Gemara says, "Boy mine Rav Dimi Bar Yosef from Rav Nachman." Rav Dimi Bar Yosef asked Rav Nachman that mamish this question. Ha'omer l'shluchai tzei u'shchait. I tell a shliach, go shech me a chicken. V'halach u'matzah shachat. And he goes and he finds the chicken is already shechted. Mahu, meaning, I just show up and the chicken's on the table. I don't know what happened. Did he shecht it? Did he find it? What's the status? I send the shliach to go shech me a chicken. When I come back to the table, there's a chicken on the table shechted. I don't know if he did it. I don't know if he bought it. I don't know what happened. So the halacha is a mahu. What's the halacha? Which is mamish the case of the brisa that we said before. It's fine. So he says, Amar lei, cheskasei shachet. Yeah?
There's a probability that you 50-50 that guy did it, and you know that the other one is just a random one.
Yeah, but Rav Mitzuyin Eitzel Shchuta Mumchane, it doesn't really make much sense. So let me just sort of say outside what's going to be the conclusion. The conclusion is that the reason why this is okay, the Gemara at first assumes that the reason why it's okay is because I assume the shliach was the one who did it, because there's a chazaka, Adam Oisa Shlichusai, that a person will do the job. Meaning, if I send Mr. Lord, hey, do me a favor, shech me a chicken. I come back, there's a chicken on the table shechted, so the Brisa says it's okay, Rav Yosef said it's okay. Why? We assume at first, it's because I could assume he did it. The problem is, as the Gemara is going to point out, in that very same case, but instead of shchita, I say, Mr. Lord, do me a favor, separate truma from me. I come back and I see that it's separated. The halach is no good. Why? Because I don't know that he did it. Maybe Gavin did it without my knowledge. So what's going on over here? Do we assume that the shliach did it or not? So the Gemara is going to respond. There are two fundamental cases. We don't assume the shliach did it. We assume we don't have to assume the shliach did it. You see, by truma, if someone else did it, that's a problem. I can only appoint a shliach. You can't just separate truma from me without my knowledge. So if someone else did it other than Mr. Lorch, it's a big problem. But when it comes to shchita, it's fine either way. If he did it, great. If someone else did it, it doesn't matter who did it, because I can assume whoever did it properly. As opposed to truma, it very much matters who did it. Only the shliach has my consent. Other people do not have my consent. That's why. So the Gemara first assumes that the reason why it's okay in this case of a chicken is because I could assume the shliach did it. The Gemara is going to point out that's not always the established chazaka. It says the Gemara, wait a minute, a second shayla. Say utraim, if I say to that same shliach, do me a favor, go separate truma for me. And I come back and I see that all my produce is already allocated, it's all separated. What's the halacha? No good. So I don't understand. By the chicken it's okay because I can assume the shliach did it. But by the truma it's no good because I assume someone else did it. So be consistent. Do I assume the shliach did it or not? So manavshach, the Gemara says, I don't understand. If we have a chazaka, that a shliach oisa shlichusai, afilu truma nami, then even truma should be good. And if I could assume it's done by a rando, then afilu shchita nami, then why is the shchita okay? So the Gemara says, here's the rule. Amrle, l'chitichol ala kura de milcha, when you eat a cup of salt, when you measure out a cup of salt for me, I'll answer. So the Gemara, Pashas Moshe Shanim say that this is like a joke. I don't know. You work for me, I'll tell you. I'm not sure. So actually, the Bab Rabbi used to say that salt is like sharp. He was saying when you start eating some salt, when you're sharp enough, you should be able to figure this out on your own. Use some sharpness to be able to figure this out on your own. Really, we do not have a chazaka that the shliach himself will do it. However, it will get done. Obviously it got done. I don't necessarily know who did it. You see, by truma, if someone else did it, that's a major issue. If I appoint Menashe to separate truma for me, and then Gavin does it, that's a problem. You don't have consent to separate truma for me. And you're only able to separate truma midas. Not without the consent of the owner, you can't separate truma. And by the way, the reason being is because even though there is a concept called zachin l'adam shalei b'fanav, so isn't separate truma good for me? I want my truma separated. The answer is it depends. Truma is not set. It's not 10%. It could be a 40th, a 50th, or a 60th, depending on how generous you are. I told him to separate it. He knows my generosity level. You don't, so you don't have the right to do it. So if you separate truma, it's no good. But by chicken, shechted, I don't care who did it. If he did it, great. If someone else, so either way, it's going to be fine. Until I know that the shaykhid is ignorant, it's going to be okay anyway. So it doesn't really matter who did it. So it says the Gemara, by shchita, even if someone else did it, the average shaykhid is knowledgeable. But truma, but by truma, if it's taka possible that someone else did it, then it's considered Tayyim Shlemidas and it's no good.
So he's basically saying that there's no chazaka.
That he's the one who did it, but by shchita it doesn't matter who did it. Because Rav Mitzuna Shechtem Mumchanim doesn't make a difference who did it. Now, we're saying this rule that the average shaykhid, even if you don't know him, you don't know his background, you could assume that they're knowledgeable. So Leima Rav Mitzuna Eitzel Shchita Mumchanim Tanohi. I think it's the following Machlekes Tanoim. Now, what's the Machlekes Tanoim? The Machlekes Tanoim is like this: Harei she'avdu le'gediya v'tarnagoyim. You lost your goats and your chickens, so you're looking for them. Halach u'matzah shchutim, and you find them shechted. Now, you don't know who shechted them. Someone shechted them. So, Rav Yehuda Oyser, Rav Yehuda says you can't eat it. Why? So stop right here. Doesn't that kind of sound, because Rav Yehuda holds that you can't just assume that it was shechted properly. We don't say Rav, people that shecht are knowledgeable. It's a problem. Rabbi Chanina b'noi Rav Yosef glili mater. He says it's mutter. He says it's mutter. So it seems to be a massive machlokes. Rav Yehuda says it's always a problem. And Rav Chanina holds that it's always okay. So it's a machlokes of whether Rav Mitzuyin Eitzel Shchita Mumchen. Now, this seems to be a machlokes in all circumstances. I find the chicken, it doesn't matter where I find the chicken, Rav Yehuda will always feel it's a problem, Rav Chanina will always feel it's okay. Comes Rabbi, and Rabbi says as follows: Nirin dvarim shel Rav Yehuda shematzan ba'ashba, v'divra Chanina b'yeshav v'yesaglili shemotzan b'bayis. Says Rabbi, I'll tell you my psak. I agree with Rav Yehuda if you found the chickens in the trash. You see, if you found them in the trash, then you could assume that something went wrong with them, right? Why else are people throwing in the trash? So if you find the chickens in the trash, it's no good. That's when I agree with Rav Yehuda that it's a problem. But if you find the chickens on the kitchen table, shechted, then I think it's okay. That's when I follow Rav Chanina. So it seems to be a machlokes in all cases. Rav Yehuda always says it's a problem. Rav Chanina always says it's okay. And then Rabbi says, I paskin like Rav Yehuda when you find it in the trash, and Rav Chanina when you find it in the kitchen. Okay. So says the Gemara, what's the machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Chanina? My lav b'hakem miflagi. The mar savar amrinu roiv mitzui etzel shchita mumchanein. Umar savar lo amrinu roiv mitzui etzel shchita mumchanein. What is the machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Chanina? Again, they seem to be arguing in all circumstances. You find the chicken shechted, doesn't matter where. Rav Yehuda will say it's a problem. Rav Chanina will say it's okay. Rav Yehuda will say it's a problem because you don't know who shechted it. We do not say roiv shechtim are knowledgeable. And Rav Chanina says it's always fine because we say roiv shechtim are knowledgeable. So it's a machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Chanina whether roiv mitzui and etzel shchita mumchanein. So the Gemara says, no. You're assuming they argue in all circumstances. It's not so true. The Gemara says, Amr Rav Nachman Yitzchak loy. No, incorrect. Everyone agrees that the average shaykhid is knowledgeable. Both Rav Yehuda and Rav Chanina. So what's the machlokes? The Gemara responds, they don't always argue. They only argue in one case. Meaning, Babayis, if you find the chicken shechted in the house, everyone will agree it's okay. Even Rav Yehuda, because Rav Sheichtin are mumchen. Even Rav Yehuda will be okay if you found the chickens in the house. Now, ba'ashra shebashuk, and if you find them in the public trash, see, they used to have, like in Eretz Yisrael, they would have trash cans in the house, and then they would have trash cans in the street. You know, like those big dumpsters. If you find the chickens in the house, everyone agrees it's good. If you find them in the dumpsters in the street, everyone agrees no good. Because the dumpsters in the street, you only throw real trash out there. So if you put it there, because it's going to smell, you put it there, done. Everyone agrees, no good. It's clear from the shechita, from the placement of the animal, that the shechita was not done properly. What is the machlokes? The machlokes is you find it in the trash can in the house. Apparently, so I would say if you find the trash can in the house, it's trash. Apparently, they would sometimes leave things that were kind of gross but still usable in the trash can of the house. So it's an animal, it's a dead animal, but it's still good, but it's got a lot of blood and gross, whatever. So they would leave it in the trash can of the house till they were ready to prepare it for dinner. The machlokes is, if you find a chicken shechted in the trash can of the house, What can I assume happened? Mar savar adam asil hatal nevlase be'asher shebabayis. One opinion, Rabbi Yehuda says, well, if you found it in the trash can of the house, it's probably trash. Which means, although normally we assume that the shaykhid knows what he's doing, obviously something went wrong here. Umar savar, but Rav Chanina responds, no, ain't adam asil hatal nevlase be'asher shebabayis. He says, no, they don't put real trash in the trash can of the house. The trash can of the house is more like storage. If it was really trash, they would bring it to the street. Okay, so that's the machlokes. So it's a very limited machlokes. It's basically a machlokes in mitzias of would someone throw out something really gross in the trash can of their house. Rav Yehuda says yes, Rav Chanina says no. So it's a much more limited machlokes. Yeah.
What would Rav Yehuda say in that last case we have about the chicken and like the?
It depends. I don't know. He would say it's fine.
Fine?
He would say because Raiv Mitsuyan Eitzel Shchita Mumchenhen.
He's just saying it's
He's saying it's dafka when you find in the trash can of the house. Meaning they're only arguing in a very limited, isolated case. You found it in the trash can of the house. You found it in the trash in the street, everyone agrees no good. You found it anywhere else, everyone agrees it's fine. Because Raiv Mitsuyan Eitzel Shchita Mumchenhen is universally accepted. The whole machlokes is you found it in the trash can of the house. Here's the issue with this. This is very good, very nice. Let me just review one quick point. The Brisa said, Rav Yehuda says it's a problem. Rav Chanina says it's fine. And then what did Rav Yehuda Hanasi say? I agree with Rav Yehuda that it's a problem when when you found it in the trash can of the street, but I agree with Rav Chanina when you find it in the house. Now you're telling me they don't argue about those cases. Right? We started off thinking that they argue in all circumstances. Rabbi Yehuda feels it's always a problem no matter what. Rav Chanina feels it's always okay no matter what. Comes Rabbi and he says, I agree with you in A and I agree with you in B. But now you're telling me, no. They're only arguing in a specific case, which is the garbage can in the house. Then what is Rav Yehuda Nasi talking about? Rav Yehuda Nasi is coming and saying, I agree with Rav Yehuda that it's a problem if you found it in the trash can of the street. Everyone agrees to that. That's not a machlokes. And then he's saying, but I agree with Rav Chanina when you found it in the house. Everyone agrees to that. They're not arguing in those cases. It's like Rav Yehuda Nasi, he's completely now missed the boat because you're telling me they only argue, you have A, B, and C. A is in the house, everyone agrees it's fine. C is in the trash can on the street, everyone agrees no good. They only argue in B. What did Rav Yehuda Nasi say? I agree with Rav Yehuda in A, and I agree with Rav Chanina in C. Well, they don't argue in A and C. They're only arguing in one isolated case. So now Rav Yehuda Nasi, I have no idea what he's talking about. So it says the Gemara, Amar Mar, Amar Rabbi Nivin Rav Yehuda Shematzan Ba'ashba. When Rav Yehuda said that I agree with Rav Yehuda, Rabbi said, I agree with Rav Yehuda if you found it in the trash. Well, hi ashba, ilay mashba shabashuk du kuliyamali pligi da aser, el labshi da ashba shababayis. But ema seifa, v'divra chanina b'reisir shagalisha matzim babayis. My bias, ilam babayis mamesh amar du kuliyamali pligi da shabshi da ashba shababayis. Rav Yehuda, if the only time that they argue is one case, then how could Rav Yehuda? This is the Shiloh of the Gemara. If the words are just basically, if they only argue in one case, then how could Rabbi say, I agree with him in A and I agree with him in B? They're only arguing in one case. So you're by definition contradicting yourself. So the Gemara says, Kasha de Rabbi, other Rabbi. So go to the next page. The Gemara says, here's the answer. Hachi Kamar. No, Rabbi was not saying who he paskins like. Rabbi was clarifying the machlokes. You know what Rabbi was actually saying? Nirin divrei Rav Yehuda le Rav Chanina b'noish Rav Yosef Gli b'asher shebashuk. I agree with Rav Yehuda when you find it in the public trash that it's a problem. Why? Because Rav Yehuda doesn't argue in that case. Meaning when Rabbi said his psak, he was not saying they argue in all circumstances, I agree with A and I agree with B. He was saying when do they argue, when do they not argue. He was saying, Nidr and Div Rav Yehuda, I agree with Rav Yehuda that it's a problem when you find it in the public trash. Why? Because they all agree to that case. Meaning, what Rebbe is basically telling you is when do they argue? Rebbe is saying, I agree when you find it in the public trash it's a problem, because they both agree to that. And I agree when you find it in the house, because they both agree to that. Rebbe is he's not saying his opinion, he's just clarifying when do they argue. Okay. Back to the original Mishnah, we had that the people are not able to shecht are a cher shaita v'katan. Why? Because the Shema Yikalkulu, they might mess up. Says the Gemara just in Dikduk, it doesn't say Shema Kilkel. Maybe they did mess up in the past. It's Shema Yikalkel in the future. Isn't the entire Mishnah talking about after the fact? What's the halacha? The Mishnah is saying, B'di'evet, it's a problem of Chershet V'katan Shechted. You can't eat the Shechita because they might mess up in the future. They messed up. The Mishnah is talking about B'di'evet. I have meat here that was Shechted by Chershet V'katan. The Mishnah says you can't eat it. It should say Shema Kilkel because they already messed up, not Shema Yakalkel in the future. So the Gemara says Shema Kilkel like Katani Shema Yakalkelu. What's the diktuk is off? So Amarava Zaysemeres in Moisin Lahen Chullin Meikara L'Chachila. You know what it means? The Mishnah is telling me. The Mishnah is telling me. We said before in the Mishnah, as we'll see in a moment, if you're watching a Cherishet V'Katan, they can shecht. The Gemara is now saying, do not do that L'Chachila. Shema Yakalkelu. Not only is a Cherishet V'Katan a problem b'di'eved, don't l'chachila rely on a mashkiach to give it to them. Shema yakalkulu, because they might mess up. And what's the problem if they mess up? You have to throw out the animal. You'll say, okay, it's bal tashchis. Don't go into a situation relying on a mashkiach. Shema yakalkulu. So bidi evid, it's a problem if nobody's watching. If someone watched, we said it's fine, but don't do it l'chachila. Shema yakalkulu, because they might mess up. Even a mashkiach won't be able to stop them from messing up. They'll just be able to testify that they messed up, and therefore don't do it because you'll have to throw at it to be about tashchus. Now the Mishnah then said, but if you're watching a cherishet v'katan, it's fine. V'kulan sheshachtu acher marinaisa shchitas ksher. By the way, even though if you remember in the beginning of the Masechta v'kulan, we said how is that talking about cherishet v'katan? It shouldn't say v'kulan. It should be v'im. But b'kitzur, it's also talking about cherishet v'katan. So if you have a cherishet v'katan that you watched, it's okay. Now here's the Gemara's point though. What does a mashkiach do? A mashkiach just tells you that they did it properly. Does not help you with kavana. A cherishet v'katan are able to shecht if a mashkiach is watching. What about kavana? The answer is you don't need kavana when you shecht. Shechita meaning, you learn from this sugya, you don't need to be thinking anything. If a man just takes a knife and just cuts the neck of the animal properly, it's okay. You don't need any special kavanas, l'shem, nothing. It's not a carbon, just thought is nothing. So it says the Gemara. Because again, if you need kavana, cherishet v'katan can't have kavana. Man tana delei bein kavana l'shchita. Who is the author of our Mishnah that you do not need kavana when you shecht? Amar Rabbi Rabbi Nasan he. Rabbi says it's Rabbi Nasan. The tani oisha zemir de min chavrei zorak sakin lenoitze bekoisel v'holach v'shachta kedarka. Rabbi Nasan mashe v'chalam paislan. I take a knife and I throw it because I'm taking target practice. And while it's flying in the air, it cuts the neck of the animal. Rabbi Nassan says it's fine. You didn't even intend to shecht? Rabbi says it's fine. You don't have to intend to shecht. The Chacham say it's an issue because the Chacham feel you have to be mechaven l'shem shchita. You have to mechaven that you're doing a shchita because it's the Ratzon Hashem to do a shchita. So according to the Chacham, you need kavana. So according to the Chacham, a cherishet v'katan can't shecht even if a mashkiach is watching because they can't have kavana. But according to Rabbi Nassan, if you throw a knife and while it's in midair, it cuts the neck of an animal, it's kosher. Says the Gemara, Haba'ina Mailechu Mevi. Wait a minute, when you shecht, you have to actually go forward and backwards. In order to cut the trachea and esophagus properly, you can't just go one direction, unless it's a super long knife. You have to go forward and back. So if you're throwing a knife in midair, how is it going forward and back? So the Gemara says, Shaholchu Bakadarka. The case is it goes forward, it cuts the neck, and then it ricochets off the wall backwards and cuts going backwards as well. Okay, so let's see this. So let's finish up. So we're saying right now is that a cherishet v'katan cannot have kavana. Now that would mean that they're not able to shecht a carbon, because for a carbon you have to be mechaven l'shem carbon, right? If it's an oila, you have to think it's an oila. If it's a chatas, you have to think it's a chatas. They might be able to shecht if people are watching, right? They could maybe, they could shecht properly physically, but they can't have kavana. So Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Boi Rav Yechanan Katan yesh loy machshava or ein loy machshava. Can a katan have machshava? Let's say you have a halachic consideration based on machshava. Are they able to have proper machshava? So that could be negeya shchita, right? Shechting, thinking it's an oila of a carbon, or that could be, as we'll see in a moment, if I have we have this for Hilchos Shabbos. If I have a rock, right? A rock is muksa, but let's say I'm mechavin. I declare, I say it out loud. This rock is not muksa. I'm going to use it on Shabbos as a paperweight. The halach is it's not muksa anymore. So there's a maisa, but just machshava bilvad is able to remove it. Could a katan have machshava to remove muksa or to create tuma? Right? if you have a rock that's not makabel tuma because it's not a kli, but let's say you're mechaven to use it as a kli, then it becomes a kli. So and then it's makabel tuma. Could a katan have kavana? So says the Gemara, Amrli Ravami, v'tiboyle maisa. What about a maisa? Meaning, why are you asking about whether they have kavana? What about can they accomplish an act according to halacha? So he says, that doesn't bother you. Maishna maisa delay kami boile. Why are you not bothered by a maisa? Ditznan yeshla maisa, because there's a mishnah that tells you mafurish that they're able to do an act that could change halacha. They may not be able to have kavana, but they could do an act. But then machshava nami, the problem is that very mishnah that says they're able to do a maisa, loiti boile. It's not ein la machshava. That very mishnah also says they don't have the capabilities of having kavana. In other words, you're asking about whether they can have machshava, whether they're able to have kavana and halacha. But why aren't you bothered by a maisa? You say, well, there's a mishnah in Kalim, as we'll see in a moment. The mishnah in Kalim says first they have a maisa, but that same mishnah in Kalim says they don't have machshava. So what are you asking one without the other? If you know the mishnah, then you have the answer to both. If you don't know the Mishnah, then you don't know the answer to either. So why are you asking just about Machshava and not Maisa? So it says, what's this Mishnah? Ditnan. Ha'alon, the acorn, Harimon, the pomegranate, Va'egos, and the walnut. All of these things are not Mekabel Tuma, right? Let's say you have an acorn. An acorn's not Mekabel Tuma. Now, how could you be making Mekabel Tuma? One of two ways. You can carve it out and make it like a holder for something, because now you made a maisa to make it a kli, or you could have machshava that it's a kli. So what does the Mishnah say? Shechakum tinoikis lamed ben afar. If a child hollowed it out to put sand in it, meaning he did a maisa, or shetkinim lakav mazayim tmeim. They did a maisa, it's now makabel tuma because a child is able to do a maisa, but mipnei sheyesh lahen maisa. But zok the Mishnah, ein lahen machshava. But machshava they don't have. So the question is, you asked the shayla of whether they have machshava, but you didn't ask maisa. Why? Because you know this Mishnah. Well, this Mishnah addresses maisa and it addresses machshava. So what really is your question? It can't be machshava because you know they're not able to have machshava, and it can't be maisa because you know they're able to do a maisa. So what really is your question? So the Gemara will end with this. My question is, machshava greidas loy kami boile. I know they can't have machshava, meaning, I know that if they think that a rock is not muksa, it's muksa. They're not able to just have machshava. Here's my question. My question is as follows. I actually think it's a very lumdish shayla. What if they do an act? So they could do an act, but they can't have machshava. They can't have kavana. What if they do an act that indicates they're having kavana? I'll give you an example. They have a carbon, right? An oila. Now, they're not able to have kavana that this is an oila. They can't think this is an oila, not a shlom. They can't have kavana. They're able to do the act of shchita, because they could shecht a non-carbon. But they can't have kavana by a carbon. What if there's an animal, they walk into the Beis HaMikdash, and they say, what is that? What's that? And they say, oh, that's an ola. And they say, yeah, but it's in the south. It's got to go to the north. And they take the cow, and they walk it to the north, and then they shecht it. Here's the question. Is that a good shchita? You'll say, well, they can't have kavana. So no. Yeah, but they did an act which indicates that they had kavana. Do you understand what I'm saying? Meaning, if they just shecht it and said, oh, I thought it was an ola, no good. They could do an act, but they can't have kavana. But over here, they did the act of taking it from the south to the north, which indicates that they know it's an oila. So they have a maisa which implies that they had machshava. Does that change anything? Or no, they can't halachically have. That's the Gemara's question. The Gemara said, they did a maisa that is clear they had machshava. Kigoin, what's the case? There was an oila that was sitting in the south of the Azara, which is not a place that it could be shechted. The kid took the cow to the north of the Azara, and then shechted it there. Mai. So what's the halacha? Do we say mida'aisya b'tzafon v'shachat from the very fact that he brought it to the north, he did that maisa and then shechted it? That shows that he had the proper kavana. That's an ola, meaning that a child is able to have kavana. We just can't trust that he had kavana. But if he has a maisa which indicates he has kavana, then it's effective. Or no, perhaps he moved it because he didn't like the spot of it. A kid's a kid. And he's like, I didn't like it over there. I liked it over here. Not that he knows what an oila is. He could say whatever he wants. We don't trust him. So if he doesn't know what he's doing, why did he move it from south to north? Kids do crazy things. And therefore, we don't trust that he had the proper kavanah. We'll pick it up tomorrow. We'll reaffirm this. Shiloh, we'll do this tomorrow.